Everybody here. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Roman Crozet from the Climate Change Association. I thank you all for being present, participants, panelists, our operator, Juliette Nouel, and our interpreters. For a brief reminder, there's a translation in French-English. It's available on the bottom of your screen. You can click on the little globe, and you can also send your questions via the chat, and we will try to answer to these at the end of the session. I'd like to remind you that this session is recorded, and it will be available in replay on our website. The Climate Change Observatory is publishing the 2020 version of its climate statement and analysis, and the 2020 version is 250 pages translated into English and providing a panorama of all the actions taken on all 5 continents. And there's also a quantitative and qualitative reading of the evolution of the gas emissions. Thank you for being so many of you for this session and debate organized. There are many debates organized this week, so we will talk about the trends analyzed in this assessment and to see how we can accelerate these changes for climate change. And don't not hesitate to look at our website to know about the schedule and for the program this week. And just as a reminder, on the 8th of December, we will also hold a conference for the international press. I will now give the floor to our president, the president of the Climate Change Association, Ronan Dantec, sorry. So he will tell you about the work we did and our observatory work. Thank you, Roman. Climate change is in the galaxy of all the NGOs, all the structures mobilizing at the forefront of the climate. And they have as objective to federate non-state actors with different activities, NGOs, associations, women associations, farmers, young people. And the actions we lead are numerous. First of all, that is why we are attractive. We put together actors we discuss around consumption modes. Some were held in Agadir to put our best practices together. And it is the case in Africa. We have organized for several years a non-state event in Africa, the pre-African COP for climate. And of course, this year we weren't able to hold it physically because we were supposed to go to Rwanda. Unfortunately, webinars organized by Roman Crozet were followed online, and we will continue in this field with the adoption of the mobility roadmap in Ivory Coast, which will serve as a basis for the elaboration and the creation of the new roadmaps, and with all the non-state actors that are necessary to this impulse. And second axis of our actions and this was the case in the European Summit for the recovery plan. We discussed about prioritary actions in this observatory and supported by personalities, diverse personalities in the world of climate. We also have, so for this advocacy, you can see hundreds of actions that are presented on our website, and there's a library of climate. So we have this observatory, Climate Change, which is something very special. And maybe being a little pretentious, I could say that today the annual report is the most comprehensive for actions efficiently carried out by actors, whether companies, collectivities, by looking at them together, we see the quantitative results, and then we can present every year several hundreds of pages to have the most comprehensive panorama of what is done in the world, and we are very keen on doing that. It is the only document, and this is the same for all our actions. These actions are translated in French and English. This annual report for the climate actions, I think it's the third edition now, and it is becoming known. The previous year, we presented all the reports together, financial reports, collectivity reports, sectorial reports. It was very complicated to digest in such a short period. So a few weeks ago, we published the financial report, and now we have the sectorial report with, once again, different sectors that are analyzed. And we will, in the coming weeks, publish a specific report for territories and for adaptation. So it is a rather important work, which today I believe is understood and expected by a number of you. I thank the hundreds of people who have subscribed for this presentation this afternoon. And in conclusion of this introduction, I'd like to thank all of our partners. And even though we are a small entity, we need to finance our activities. We have help from the Ministry of the Ecological Transition, of Solidarity, the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, the BNP Bank, and Schneider Electric, Michelin, SNCF, AFD, Valorem, as well as the Caisse des Dépôts Group. So without their help, we wouldn't be able to publish this report. And of course, I would also like to thank the team from the observatory. It's a huge amount of work around. Amaury Parel is the coordinator of the project, and I believe that they are creating the best world reports. And there's also Tanya. We have other members of the team, Aude Valade, who have contributed to the report and written a number of chapters in the reports. We have sectorial reports, as I said. We have more precise reports in certain sectors, which we study per country in certain territories throughout the year. And without going into further detail of the report, we are very happy to open this conference with a few words from Laurence Tubiana. She, of course, was the French ambassador of the COP21. With Laurent Fabius, they led to this agreement, essential agreement, which will probably be relaunched today with the international context. So things are unchained now and better. So we are delighted to have her words as a welcome opening speech.
Bonjour.
Hello. I am happy to participate, even from afar, to this event of climate change and to the meeting of 2020, and to measure with you the road traveled by non-governmental actors in the fight against climate change. This year, 2020, has been particularly disruptive. After years of difficult climate change in terms of actions, especially since the United States left the Paris Agreement, we have been confronted with a lot of obstacles on the political level. The decision of the Trump administration has obviously led other countries to want to block action. I'm thinking of Brazil, of course, I'm thinking of Australia and many others. As a result of these negative aspects, the climate has been very much blocked as an important part of the international political agenda, especially at the level of governments. But in the meantime, the actions of cities, regions, companies, and investors has not faltered. And that's basically what is very important. It is to see that whatever the decisions these governments took at particular times, the conviction of citizens, the conviction of the local authorities, the conviction of businesses, everyone on this side of society thought that action had to continue. And as a result, even if in 2019 we somewhat exceptional year, linked essentially to the crisis of demand and economic paralysis, the health crisis, and even so, it should be noted that 2020 was supposed to be the year of the peak in global emissions, and we are obviously not there yet. So, of course, important things have also happened because for the past 2 years now, a little earlier, even if when we look at some countries that had made some commitments to move towards net zero emissions by 2050, which is becoming the rallying banner for a whole series of players, really put into practice, into plans, into strategies, the global objectives of the Paris Agreement. And in the last 2 years, we have seen, especially this year in 2020, many companies, investors, and banks. It's still a bit far for the international institutions, but I hope it will come,
largement
who, moreover, largely driven and pushed by a United Nations Secretary General who is particularly active on the climate, have decided to put forward their long-term plan in 2050 for most of them, some companies in 2030, to move forward towards carbon neutrality. More importantly, it is to describe how they were going to achieve this carbon neutrality with this change of business model. A lot of cities have also done so, and seeing clearly the things that had to be done in terms of mobility, obviously, gradually dispensing the use of private cars, or at least the combustion engine. In recent years, we have seen a shift towards soft mobility, a real monitoring of air pollution as a very significant factor in social, at the same time, inequalities, social inequalities, and collective public health. But it is also the search for renewable electricity, thinking that this is the idea for tomorrow's challenge, so competitive with other energies. It is also about wondering whether we should not change the course of things in agriculture and food, in the way both in terms of consumption, because we are citizens and we consume, but also in terms of the way these agricultural products are produced and the techniques used to produce them. Because agricultural and food is also a major source of green gas emissions. A lot has happened in the last 3 years with a banner that seems to me to be really motivating, which is clear, and which says that we also need to implement the Paris Agreement, and that means being carbon neutral in 2050 or shortly after, and having actions that in 2025, 2030 go in the right direction. It seems to me that this action by non-governmental actors, and in particular local authorities, I find this movement today in the real economy of companies and investors who have basically done without the activity of governments for quite a while. This is the time to come together. We must recognize that in any case, as early as 2019 and particularly in 2020, the European Union has truly reaffirmed its public policy orientation towards the Green Deal, which sets the objective of carbon neutrality by 2050. And following the European Union, China, as we saw in September, announced its carbon neutrality objective for 2060. South Korea and Japan soon followed suit. And we are now seeing more and more countries, even today, announcements from Colombia to propose a new and much more ambitious national contribution for 2030. Costa Rica, several Latin American countries, perhaps South America tomorrow, all of them are committed to a renewed ambition. So this is the time in 2020, that's why your meeting is so important. This is the movement when the real economy must join the action of governments and put pressure on them. It is time for all the efforts that have been made, including the national contributions that will have to be presented next year in Glasgow at the COP26. These national contributions must integrate all these efforts, all these advances that are being made by non-governmental actors, and that this be translated into these more ambitious climate plans for both 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2050. So you see, this is a crucial time for non-governmental actors not only to make commitments, to describe their plans, to show what kind of zero carbon society they want to build, but also to put pressure on governments to integrate into all dimensions of public policy. So everyone is counting on you. It's really time to take advantage of this political momentum that's being rebuilt. The stars are aligning again, and as they did in Paris in 2015, we must not miss this moment. We must not miss this opportunity. Thank you.
Merci à Laurence.
Thank you, Laurence Tubiana, for this word to mobilize this and the acknowledgement of non-state players, because it is true that there is a strategy of governments, and in terms of financing, the reality of the actions is made by the public representatives, the representatives for the reducing of gas emissions. Climate Change produces a report that looks at all of the actions put in place, the millions of actions that are led, but also the representatives as well, to see the weak signals of evolution. This is what we are doing every year. And the specificity this year is that we haven't limited ourselves to limiting to 2019. These are figures that we obtain at the end of spring, but it was necessary to integrate also this major sanitary crisis, which totally upturned and upset the framework of these emissions. So we have two figures to analyze. A first figure which echoes to what Mrs. Tubiana said, the evolution of carbon emissions in a normal setting, that of 2019, plus 0.6%, less than in 2018, 2017, but still too much. And I'd like to remind you that the scientists at the GIEC said that the peaks were supposed to be in 2020 in terms of emissions. So in 2019, we don't know how much it increased, but we know that there will be a decrease in 2020 because the program of the United Nations believes that because of the crisis, these emissions will decrease. This year, there is not only an overview of everything that has been done around the world, all these typical actions that were carried out, the trends, to look at the reports that we synthesize and to see which were the weak signals of 2019 and which were the consequences of the crisis. For the weak signals, weak signs, I will leave Mr. Paré and Mr. Gilles to come back to that in more details, but globally, this was following to what we had already noted in our reports in 2017, 2018, on the fact that there is a decrease of the productions of CO2 in connection with electricity and production of electricity and renewable energies. Last year, we saw there was a glass ceiling with the sales of new cars. In the report 2018, we insisted on the increase of citizen mobilization and the legal aspects of the mobilization. We had also, unfortunately, noticed the failures and the delays in the policies. So these are the trends, the slow trends on which we have led our analysis, but we can see that for the COVID crisis, several points which seemed very important to us to underline in this introduction, which were accelerated because of the crisis, in line with these trends, these deep trends that we analyze every year. First of all, the restructuration of the energy sector is a point that seems quite essential to underline. With the COVID crisis, and this was connected to the renewable energies in the past years and their economic competitivity, which is growing, the decrease of petrol in a context of economic war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, namely, has led to a strong depreciation in terms of capital of a certain number of majors, petrol companies, oil companies, a depreciation for the big European oil companies, and also in the renewable sector example, with the fact that today we have an American company, Nexera, in the United States, which is a renewable company, and it's is on the stock exchange, it's going to be higher than some of the oil companies. So this acceleration is probably due to the decrease of the oil price. And this leads us to ask questions on returns on investments and investments on the long term for the oil production. This is a very important point, and Amaury will come back to it in more details. Second point on which we wanted to come back to are the very quick evolutions during this COVID crisis of mobility, and namely the ability that have had collectivities. We have 100 examples around the world to develop very rapidly during the crisis a transportation offer. For example, we have seen this in Paris, but it is the case everywhere else in the world. Special lanes for bicycles have been created, and this to encourage soft mobilities and pedestrians to walk also. So this is one of the effects of the crisis because of the lack of public transportation during the crisis, but this soft mobility has increased over the last years, and this is very important. Conversely, we are worried about the future of public transportation with a risk around concerning health, which was underlined during this pandemic, and a lack of organization in terms of economy for collective transportation and private transport, which suffered greatly in Africa. Thirdly, we wanted to underline another theme, and there is much more in the report, of course, but the legal aspects also. A few years ago, we underlined what had happened in Colombia with a condemnation of the state on their actions on the forests. And we are also trying to follow the impact of the legal decisions on the environment. And a lot of legal decisions in favor of the climate have occurred. As you may know, the condemnation of the France took place, and also about the airport that was blocked because its development seemed incompatible with climate objectives, and other activities in India, namely. But lastly, to conclude on these key elements of the last year, 2019-2020, for us, climate change and the climate action goes hand in hand with the agenda of sustainable agenda elements, and we must reach all objectives together. It is a very worrying year, of course, with the major economic crisis and the key indicators and linked to poverty. This has incidence on people's lives, on the climate as well. To take an example, the fact that we can see that the access to energy, decarbonated renewable energies, and especially in homes in Africa, for example, has really been reduced. And we can see, for example, the increase of pressure on cooking, on heating elements. And these are economic indicators that have degraded. The budgets for development, also for the climate, are threatened. And these are questions that we want to tackle. So these are cross-sectional aspects, but the strength of our activity is also important, and I will give the floor to Amaury and Antoine to present the essential sectors of this assessment and review report. So, and to show you that the difficulty of this day is to summarize everything, because there are hundreds of pages and now we have only 20 minutes, which is not the easiest of exercises, but you will of course be able to read the complete report, and you will see all the wide, rich panels of activities.
Hello, Ronan. My name is Amaury Parel. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to get an overview per sector. First of all, the production of energy and electricity. After a decrease in 2019, we had a moderate growth in the economy and electricity demand. And secondly, we'll look at the historical decline in coal. In 2020, this crisis mainly impacted coal, which absorbed the fall in electricity consumption, while RE benefited from priority access to the grid and lower operating costs. Over the last 2 years, we have seen an accelerated restructuring of the private sector. First of all, in the oil and gas sector, with the oil and gas companies who are more and more interested in renewable energy. And on the other hand, electricity companies that have closed down more plants than have opened up new plants. Few of them actually have included the low carbon policy in their investments. Now, regarding cities and regions, are developing multiple ways to achieve the 100% renewable in their mix, and 58 cities have managed to reach this goal. We've noticed contractual tools, particularly direct purchases, that now seem to be preferred to a remunicipalization, which has been at half-mast for some time. Now, while the pandemic could greatly affect access to energy and the development of off-grid in developing countries, especially in Africa, self-consumption in higher income countries continues to grow and does not seem to have suffered from the crisis. Now, regarding transport, the crisis really did stop constant increase in transport emission. Now, regarding road traffic, there's been a demand reduction that remains a blind spot for mobility strategies, but the pandemic is rekindling thinking about demobility and concepts related to the densification of services in urban areas. The crisis has also called into question the financial model of the T-comment and has speeded up the eruption of cycling and walking pretty much everywhere in the world, and especially in Europe. Therefore, manufacturers, because a drop in vehicle sales is contributing to a more moderate growth in emission in 2019, which is a sector that doesn't seem to be affected by the crisis for electric vehicle, with only 3% of the sales and less than 1% of the fleet. Now, regarding the rail sector, we've noted the expansion of the 2019 network, continued economic growth, and access to strategic resources, as well as a desire to decarbonize passenger mobility. And it's been driven above all by the expansion of the Chinese network. In the maritime sector, the slowdown in the growth of international trade and the efforts made by the players have made it possible to reduce its emissions in 2018. However, this crisis is undermining the deployment of two decarbonation and depollution strategies, the use of the NLG and the installation also of scrubbers. So these strategies are actually colliding with negative impacts that are still little taken into account. Now, to continue with the aviation sector, the unprecedented crisis facing the sector has led the industry to renegotiate the terms of the CORSIA carbon offset program. It still expects traffic to double by 2050 and hopes to offset its impact through electricity and biofuels. This is largely supported by the states through stimulus plans and a reduction in planned taxes. However, analysts and NGOs denounce a flagrant lack of alignment with the Paris Agreement, and the extension of the London airport, for example, shows that legal action could be the next battleground to halt the trajectory of demand. Now, regarding building sector, we've seen a negative evolution of emissions, indirect and direct, with an increase of almost 2% in 2019. This is due to the growth in electricity demand driven by appliances and air conditioning. Energy efficiency gains are not offsetting this growth or the growth in living space. Consumption of buildings seems little affected by the crisis, with industries' consumption being offset by households. However, it does threaten the access to clean cooking in developing countries in a context where informal settlements are increasing again. Now, existing buildings subject to few national or local obligations. We've seen mandatory reporting, for example, with notable successes in Japan and in the United States. In France, it's what we call integrated services for local renovation, or one-stop shops are an undeniable trend in Europe and should be encouraged. Now, regarding building, there will be more ruling and national laws, and the local authorities will have obligation, will have tools and have freedom of choice for the various tools that they will use. And I will end on the reflection on the use with the change of behavior, for example, the development of sustainable material and a new market for sustainable tools, and like working from home as well is another trend that we have noticed. Hello, everyone. I'm doing charge of research at Climate Change. Now I'm going to cover all the various sectors which we have studied this year. Now regarding steel production, which we have studied, this is an industrial sector which has already improved its energy capacity and has, and yet we are not very optimistic regarding the progress in the coming years. We have studied the various cases by the electrolysis of water in the manufacturing processes, especially the electric process. And we will be looking at this. And now regarding the textile sector, which is more dynamic sector, which is in the heart of the hub, we talk about this sector mainly because of its impact to the environment upstream of the manufacturing, for the amount of water that it requires for the manufacturing, or whether it be downstream for all the waste. Now, yet, textile has a great impact on the gas emission, 4% of the gas emission on a world scale. We've noticed in this sense that manufacturers have been using individual pathways from bio cotton or other products, but they also have a risk of consequences. Producing and consuming better does not mean consuming or less or producing less. On the other hand, that's what we have noticed, and that's secondhand. With the secondhand sector, for example, people may get more clothes in the end because they buy secondhand. Now, this sector is also, the other sector is the waste sector. Now, this is a sector which we often is looked at from the environmental aspects. We have little data to quantify this sector, and yet according to the last reports, especially from the World Bank, we realize that it actually is releasing a lot of gas emission because of the plastic, the single-use plastic, and the emanation of the CO2 because of the burning of the plastic. Now, two main events have unsettled these programs and for the recycling of the waste this year, which was the closing down of the border in China, which also highlighted the weaknesses in recycling capacities, and of course the COVID-19, which impacted also the recycling of plastic, single-use plastic, but has also postponed the legislation of anti-plastic laws on all the continents, and especially in Africa. Now, the drop in the crude oil prices, of course, has increased the expense of recycled plastic. Of course, this increased the problem of recycling. So you'll be able to discover in this study the various strategies mainly in Australia, in Canada, and also some strategies from certain governments and states to avoid these recycling and to find new outlets for the production of plastic, especially now the last sector which we studied this year, which is a key sector in the land use sector, because it produces a lot of gas emission, greenhouse gas emission, but also because it is a main carbon which captivate the carbon in the land. So this is a very preoccupying and concerning sector. Why? The last 10 years, with a peak in 2018, especially, and an intensification of the forest fires, also all the reports merge to conclude to the same conclusion that all the initiatives that were taken since the COP21, the declaration on forests, the Bone Challenge, the ADDI target, etc., have not been achieved, especially reducing by half the deforestation. You can also add to this dark picture the COVID-19 in countries, for example, like Brazil and other places, by slowing down the rhythm of deforestation. Still, there are a few positive points. For example, the transparency of some companies to limit the financial effects in their chain of values, and other communities for the forest risks, etc. in the Amazonia. And finally, another effect of the COVID is the One Health concept that has increased and requiring biodiversity and desertification. We've realized that the accumulation of these parameters would really help in the energy. And this has been the case of the COVID, but also other pandemics like Ebola and others. This is what you can find in this 2020 edition for climate action, for climate change. Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, Amaury. Thank you, both of you. This is really a summary, a quick summary of a report, which is a synthesis of hundreds of reports that we've had for the last few years, made by actors and players. So doing a summary and a synthesis of another report is always a very difficult exercise, and I think you have done this very successfully. Now, the objective really is to give you the desire to go to our website on climate change, and where you will find all these reports, and you will find also another report for decision makers, and you will also be able, with the mapping, be able to go back to some analysis of some sectors per country. For example, if you want to look at the mobility in Sweden or in Norway, sorry, just to take these two examples, you can just go on our website where you will find all these analyses for some cities, etc. As always, after this presentation, we will now move on, and we will now try to discuss and exchange around these various teachings drawn from these reports, the St. Thomas report on climate. And I want to thank Juliette Nouel, who is an independent journalist, for accepting to be the moderator of this roundtable. This is always a difficult exercise, especially with speakers who have a lot to say. So we will try to stick to our analysis and the report. At the end of the day, what we want to see is the action that have been carried out. So Juliette, the floor is to you. Thank you, Ronan. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this and welcome to this roundtable. We will focus on the following question: has the crisis, COVID-19 crisis, speeded up or slowed down or jammed the strategies, the climate strategies? This roundtable will last for about 45 minutes, and it will be followed by a Q&A session. Our followers will will ask their questions, and this Q&A session will last about 10 minutes. Now, let me introduce our various speakers who I'm glad to welcome. We have Johan Ransquin, who is the director for the Adaptation, Land Use and Trajectory for Low Carbon at the ADEME. Gilles Vermot Desroches, who is the director of Sustainable Development at Schneider Electric. Hello, Gilles. I cannot see you. Then we have Stephen Heddle, who is the Orkney Islands Council and the spokesperson for the Environment and Economic Convention of Local Authorities in Scotland. I'm now calling Anne Barr. She's the coordinator for climate policy at Women Engaged for Common Future.
Bonjour.
Hello. And finally, we have Henri Waisman, who is also here. He's the director of the Initiative for the Deep Decarbonization Pathways at IDDRI and co-writer of the GIEC on the 1.5 degrees report. Now, Johan, I'm going to start with you and ask you the first question. You represent the ADEME, which is the French Agency for Ecological Transition. What do you get from the assessment and the report, and how does it merge with your own experience, since you are already deploying a large recovery plan after the crisis? Yes, hello everyone. What this synthesis is showing is the impact. The impact of the crisis can vary according to the various sectors, but overall, we could say that it is negative for various reasons. First reason is that mainly organizations are also busy dealing with other issues, mainly the economic survival, especially for smaller structures. This is something that we have noticed at the regional directorate. This is a reality, something that needs to be taken into account. However, we also get the opportunity to bounce and to, in some cases, to actually start off again the various economic activities in a transition mood. As you said, the state is implementing recovery plans. In this recovery plan, we have about 30% focusing on actions for ecologic transition, with a budget of about 2 billion euros, and we are trying to encourage people to include in this recovery of some sectors which were on hold, to really adopt this logic of transition, energy transition, to try to look at circular economy, short circuits, etc. This could be true for industries and different sectors. There are different topics. I'm not going to give you the details unless you want me to say so. There will be many things to help and support the various actors. There is, however, a concern in order to join this strategy so that we would not go back to the former world, but to really move into this new and wonderful opportunity that we do have now to try to start with a different strategy of low carbon, for example, etc. However, there is a point of concern that most of the targets, and we will support the players with a diagnosis of the current situation. We will try to assess the more relevant investments so that these sectors can focus more on low carbon transition. But in any case, the difficulty which we have is that it will not necessarily be easy for these sectors to invest. The support which we are bringing is not 100% financial support, of course, and this is What is the percentage? It depends on our targets. It can go from 50 to 80% maximum. If it's a large company, it could be probably less, like around 25%, depending on the various targets, which we have still. There is a large part for the companies to support. So this is a concern which we have. We realize that there's a real willingness to move forward and to be in the positive. We've had people who are already in a logic of investment based on that policy, and they took the opportunity of the crisis to rethink about their activity, to rethink about the way they use their tools. They were going to make some investments, so they decided to actually make these investments in that new line. But in other cases, unfortunately, structures actually would have to stop and start again. And then we will have to support them and go alongside them to do so in the right direction. And then there will be a strong mobilization of all the state actors, for example, the Bank of Investment that will come with some financing. So we will support the various actors and with whatever we can do as our ADEME association, and then also find the supplement and the additional financing. So there is kind of slowing down a little bit, but the thing is to decide to still move forward. And we do come across people who are in this logic now. However, you're talking about slowing down, but a budget of 2 billion, which you would have never had if had not been for the crisis. Yes, of course, this is absolutely positive, of course, as you just say. And this will probably help us to support sectors which we were not used to working with before, that the ADEME was not necessarily working with traditionally before, like people from the restaurant and hotel sectors, to help them to reduce their energy consumption, try to look at more long-term and sustainable programs. So this is something interesting. But other industries, we will help them to decarbonize their production chains or tools, which is something which we've done before. And this, of course, will be supported by this new budget. So, of course, it's very positive. Of course, you're probably right. We probably would not have had this budget had it not been for the crisis. We could say it's a huge opportunity, but there is still much to be done. Yes, exactly. It has started, but things are already on the go. Others are still to be developed. I think we will probably do this over a period of 2 years. Thank you very much, Johan. We will probably come back to you in a short while. Now, I'm told to speak slower, because for the translators now, Gilles, it's over to you. Hello, Gilles. I said earlier, you are the director of sustainable development of Schneider Electric in the industrial building sector. How did Schneider Electric experience the COVID crisis, and what has been your experience? What have you drawn? What teaching have you drawn? And how does it match with what we've just heard from Amaury and Antoine? Yes, hello, thank you. How did Schneider Electric live this crisis? In different ways. First of all, the company is present on all continents. So the first two markets of Schneider are China and the United States. Europe on the same scale. Now, since last January until now, our company has seen the various waves coming and going. Now, this is the first topic with a management that is very evenly spread out on all the continents. We used to work with digital management, so there was no real surprise and change in the way we function, in the way most of our collaborators and associates have been working with us in a multi-continent way of working, so no big change. Now, of course, Schneider is very much involved in the building sector, so we've seen a decrease because of a decrease of the building of new buildings everywhere in the world since the crisis. At the same time, we've seen an increase of our activities on essential needs, for example, and we were thinking about the SDGs for the next 5 years. Our company decided to present its activity, data center, building, industries, in various named sectors, if you like, but to actually think about the impact of its solutions. For example, in the hospitals where our company was requested a lot to support various development and make sure that the electricity quality was good, etc., could be improved. Same for logistics chains, supply chains for the food sector, or in the digital sector, which is probably one of the greatest change that we've seen in this crisis. All of us can just about imagine, whatever your relationship with the digital sector, that the crisis would have been very, very different just 10, 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, because of the digital tools which we have now. We would not have been able to meet privately and connect the way we have, and the capacity to continue ensuring our services and the organization, even though it was a problem for a lot of people, was affected by the use of digital. So there will be no going back. And in a sense, this is probably an advantage for climate action. This may be something which we will need to look at more in depth in the future when we talk about digital. We talk about also the gas emissions. However, I'm not talking about Netflix or TikTok. Digital, where I believe every citizen, especially if they are very much committed to the planet, to climate actions. But when it comes to the digital in the building or the network infrastructure sectors, which represent between 5 and 10% of the use of the digital, we could say that this crisis has really speeded up the use of the digital, and it has actually increased the efficiency in our organization, in our consumption. So in a sense, there has been a speeding up. And one last acceleration, which is true for us, but also for a lot of our clients, and the incentive country by country, and this has been expressed differently, but the logic of a more local action, a more local consumption. We've seen it in France, we've seen it in the US, but all the continents and all the countries have started saying that they prefer to eat locally, to be in a more of a circular economy, especially also in the for the consumption of energy, etc. This is something which we have done for a while at Schneider in our multi-offer. Most of what we do is actually produced on the continent. So we do not want to have to face the difficulties of the supply chain, which we've seen recently. And this is also the opportunity to increase this dimension of a local presence. Yes. Is this something that has speeded up, would you say? Yes, this priority in order of China to be everywhere. Our products are used for the digital and electrical transition for our industrial client customer. There's always an advantage of buying these kind of products from someone who is producing more locally. So we were in this logic with plants, factories that are present in more than 90 countries. Of course, it will not be reduced. It will be increasing. However, what is striking to me, we might not be talking about the same types of companies. I agree to say that in the last 6 months, there's been a kind of amazement to see that the industries have not progressed the way that they should have. But however, we can notice an improvement. And what comes out in this report is on a global scale, companies have never made so many commitments regarding the low carbon policy. We've seen a lot of companies actually increasing their commitment to a low carbon. SBTI, which is a company which is an event where companies share their commitments and share about, their concerns to check whether or not they're inside the agreement. Many companies went there, and many other companies are doing 1.5. Maybe a year ago, roughly before the crisis started, less than a third of the companies were in that kind of logic. Do you think that this is due to the pandemic, the health crisis? Yes. All the surveys have shown that citizens, and we have collected surveys from various parts of the world, that citizens have not considered that we should reduce our commitment regarding climate, but this should be an ongoing commitment, and that should be even more important. So first of all, I think that companies have increased their commitments. We've kept the mobilization of the companies. If we look at sustainable development between 2020, we've looked at increasing the prospects. I also include the environmental and social impact. We will not save the planet. We've seen that all these process, what we use, but also we look at the social environmental aspects. So the main two trends that I would say is to get on board our suppliers. And when we talk about the company scope, we will not reach the neutrality, carbon neutrality, if companies don't do so with their suppliers. So there is something going on now. And the second trend, which will probably take longer but might be more interesting, especially in regards of the climate change actions, is to look at the way that companies will leave the corporate dialogue to really look at the products, how all these challenges and what is at stake will enrich this effort. So I believe that these two main trends, to get on board their suppliers and also to focus on the products and the value of actions, especially in the way we communicate about the products, will really affect the population more. I would talk about the third point, the scope 4, how can a company be an actor in reducing the footprint of its customers and clients. Scope 4, when we sell solutions to our clients to reduce their footprint, it's something that it might be worth measuring. I had one last thing that has nothing to do with what I've just said, but I think all of us should put this on top of all our questions. Is the main change of this crisis is that definitely poor people on this planet are young people. And when we talk about poverty, when we are used to talking about relegation, we always think about a type of population. But however, 1.8 billion of people on the planet are aged between 15 and 25. 1 out of 6 that were working at the beginning of the pandemic lost their jobs. In France, the level of poverty of the people under the age of 30 has doubled. So I believe there is a huge question to say, what are we going to do for our youth? Okay, in the short term, if we do not do anything about it, there will be another a lot of work for the coming years. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you for widening the debate for this question. And I hope, that we will come back to that later and have time. Yes, for companies, we will come back later, of course, all this that concerns companies. So I will like to leave this area, this field, and now turn to you, the local authorities in Scotland. you're in charge for them, and I would like to say how the COVID crisis has impacted your objective for a right transition towards neutrality in terms of carbon emissions.
Thank you very much.
Where
Yes,
are you?
to start with, I should explain our existing ambition before the crisis. Scotland is a place of great natural resource, human capital, social capital, and the ambition to tackle the climate emergency. And this has allowed us to conduct leading work in wind energy, tidal energy, hydrogen storage, and lead energy efficiency measures. I would hope that we have a chance to show the local government dimension of this to you at COP26 next year. Prior to the outset of the crisis, our key economic priority at COSLA, the Local Government Association, was to deliver a just transition to a net zero carbon inclusive economy. And this position remains our long-term objective. Clearly, the economic challenge created by COVID-19 has required short and medium-term interventions. And we can't deny that this has placed a hold on the work that we were continuing in conjunction with the Scottish Government to carry out to address the climate emergency. Work around the circular economy, energy efficiency and social housing, electric vehicles, district heating, heat networks, just for some examples. And clearly the crisis and the economic impact it's going to have is going to affect this discretion of local authorities and indeed households to pursue environmental options. These will become more restricted. So in terms of how do we adapt, our overarching priority remains the same, except it's, if anything, become more emphasized. So we have one priority now, which is a just transition, net zero by 2045, and a 70% reduction in emissions by 2030. And we recognize that this is a minimum response, and we recognize the increased ambition that we hope will be brought to bear to accelerate progress. But in terms of how it's changed our thinking, well, economic inclusivity and environmental sustainability must now be at the heart of all economic policy decisions if we're to realise our ambitions to a net zero inclusive economy. We have a saying, it's possible to know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And this is an economic argument that has led to the current choices that we pursue. But we feel that if we're able to model the climate risk and to assess the economics of climate change, we can know the price of this and the value of this and use it to lead our ambitions. We realise this is going to require a renewed focus on sectors of the economy which are the biggest emitters, namely transport, the energy sector. And this is all highlighted in the study. And agriculture. And I say this with a heavy heart, coming from an area of Scotland which has 20,000 people, 80,000 beef cattle. We recognise the impact that this has. And further, we need cross-cutting work to fully embrace the circular economy to become a priority in the medium term. And we recognise the leadership role that local government plays and the work that we must continue with national government to drive change. And towards this aim, the Scottish Government has been renewing its climate change strategy, and we have been participating to the fullest extent that we can to influence that. We also believe that in tune with the report, that the role of the citizen must be enhanced, and we will work with communities and local organisations every day to bring about change, to make the voices of people heard and to matter, and to bring this perspective to our partners in national government. We feel that the type of recovery that we pursue now is going to lay the foundation for future generations, and that the key role that local government plays in how we spend, how we plan, how we regulate, how we connect and educate people stands at the very heart of this economic recovery. So we're in a terrible time, but we also have an opportunity to be bold and to fundamentally rethink our traditional economic priorities, to know the value of the things that matter, including how we measure economic success, and move away from purely monetary and financial indicators to an economy which has well-being at its heart. And reflecting some of the messages in the report, I feel that I'm optimistic that recovery, with the support of the diversified climate actions that is highlighted, can still drive change, that we can recognize the value of the things that matter. Thank you.
Steven, merci beaucoup. Vous pourriez...
Thank you very much. Could you give us examples? You talked about transportation. In Scotland, did you have an acceleration of the deployment of the soft mobilities, for example? And have the local authorities done anything on that aspect?
Yes, happy to respond to that. In terms of the uptake of electric vehicles, for example, the local authorities have been key in providing charging networks, and indeed in the uptake of electric vehicles, both for personal transport and in terms of public transport and the lorries as well. In terms of the immediate actions taken during the crisis, we've moved to maintain the public transport networks that we have, despite a reduction of, say, perhaps 80% of usage, even to this date, when we've moved out of the strictest lockdown. We recognise the importance of maintaining the public transport, but we do recognise that we're in a different area. The crisis has forced us to change the working practices that we have. More people are working from home, and the retail patterns have changed as well. So the Scottish Government, in conjunction with local government, is looking at the 20-minute neighbourhoods, so people can participate in much of the activities of life without having to travel great distances. And clearly this is going to have a knock-on impact on investment strategies for public transport.
Des citoyens.
The complex situation that we're in and we're creating as well.
D'accord, merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you. We'll come back to you perhaps later to talk about the COP26, which will be organized in Glasgow. And I am now turning to you. And the mission of your NGO is to build a good, fair, sustainable world with women. Has the pandemic had an effect on these actions for women? And in terms of access to education, I know that the question is very wide and that the answer is going to depend on the regions around the world, but I will now give the floor to you to try to understand better.
Merci beaucoup et bonjour à tout le monde.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, I'm delighted to be part of this
Effectivement,
panel.
notre ONG
And of course, yes, our NGO has works on the fields with different organizations in all countries. It is also working on the world scale, global scale, as a member of the Women and Gender Constituency Coalition, which represents women and equality of gender in the Climate Convention as an official observer. So this gives us a vision which is at the same time local, and this is the reason why WCF and myself especially are part of the Council of Climate Change of the Advisory Board, and we see at
ce
the
qui se
same
passe
time
à
what
l'échelle
is
globale
happening
et nous
on the
faisons
global
remonter notre
scale, and
expérience. Donc, je dirais que
we
oui, cette crise a
we
creusé
inform on our
énormément les
experience. So yes,
inégalités de
of
genre, et
course,
je pense
this
qu'il y a eu déjà
crisis
beaucoup
has
de rapports sur ce sujet-là,
made
beaucoup d'appels,
inequalities
d'alerte,
even
même
worse, and there
d'organisations
have been
féministes
warnings from
pour dire que
feminist
cette crise du
associations to
Covid avait
say
été
that
une
this
source de
COVID crisis
violence
was source of
extrêmement
violences that
forte
were
et une
extremely
augmentation des
strong,
violences domestiques à cause justement
and
de l'arrêt des
with
possibilités de se
stop
déplacer
of the
et des
transportation
confinements,
moves and the
mais
lockdown,
également
of
une
course,
source de perte de revenus extrêmement
there has
importante
been a
pour toutes
loss
les
in terms
personnes
of
qui se
revenue
trouvent
for
dans
all
l'économie
people
informelle.
who are
Et
in
donc, je pense que ça, c'est un
economy.
des
So
premiers,
I believe
un
that
des
this
premiers
is
éléments qu'il faut
one
bien
of the
noter.
first elements
C'est
that we
que
need to make a note of,
effectivement, les jeunes sont
and
frappés de
that
plein fouet
young
par cette
people
crise
are
parce que
hit by this
les
crisis
jeunes représentent une
very
très grande
strong,
partie de la
and the young
population
people
mondiale et en
represent
particulier dans les
a
pays
big
en voie
part
de
of
développement.
the
Mais les
population
femmes
in the
également
world, and women
sont
also
frappées par cette
are
crise parce
hit by
que
this
bien
crisis
souvent,
because
et en
very
particulier dans les
often,
pays en
and
voie de développement, elles
especially
sont dans
in
l'économie
developing
informelle.
countries, they
Or,
are
les
part of
réponses que les
informal
États ont
economy.
apportées
So
à la
the
crise
states
de
have
Covid-19 se
answered
sont
to the COVID
concentrées
crisis, and
sur l'économie
they
formelle.
concentrated on the formal
Et je peux
aspects
donner
of
un
economy, and I
exemple
can give an example
d'un
of
projet que nous
a
menons au
project
Maroc
that we
et de
have
liens que
led
nous avons avec
in
nos partenaires au Maroc,
Morocco with
où on
our
voit que
partners in Morocco, and we can
des femmes
see
qui sont
that
productrices
women
d'argan et de produits
who produce
agricoles
argan
ou de plantes
oil or
aromatiques
work in
dans le sud du
agriculture
Maroc,
with
qui
aromatic
sont organisées en
plants in the south
coopérative,
of
par
Morocco,
exemple,
organize themselves,
n'ont pas pu accéder
organized
aux aides offertes
cooperatives,
par le
and they
gouvernement
didn't have
marocain
access
du
to
fait
the
qu'elles n'ont pas de
subsidies
couverture
offered by the
sociale
government because they don't
en
have
tant que
a
salariées, elles n'ont pas un statut de salarié, elles n'ont pas non
status
plus
as an
de
employee, and
protection
they don't have
sociale
any
privée.
social
Et
private
donc, ce sont des
protection mode.
personnes
So these are
qui
people
pourtant contribuent
who
de manière très forte à
have
l'économie de leur
contributed
région,
strongly to the
mais
economy in their
sont
regions,
totalement
but
isolées et
are
totalement
totally
dépourvues de revenus
isolated and
aujourd'hui parce
have
qu'elles ne
no
peuvent pas
revenue,
vendre
no
leurs
income
produits,
today
elles ne
because they
peuvent pas
cannot
non
sell
plus
their products and
accéder
they cannot
à des
have
aides.
access.
Et justement,
So
pour faire le lien avec l'action
to
climatique,
make a link with
eh
the
bien, très souvent,
climatic
il y
actions,
a un
very often
potentiel
there is
fort,
a
par
strong
exemple, dans la transition
potential
énergétique,
in the energy
dans des
transition, for
secteurs
example,
économiques qui
in
sont
economic
informels, comme la
sectors that are
transformation de
informal,
produits alimentaires.
as in the
Et là,
transformation of
eh
food.
bien, l'aide
And in this case,
qui
the
pourrait être
subsidies, the
apportée
helps that could be
vers une
provided
transition énergétique
for
forte dans ces
a
secteurs-là
strong transition in
fait
these
clairement défaut.
areas is
Et donc,
lacking.
même si on
And
voit
even
aujourd'hui que
if
certains
we can
pays
see today that
essayent
some
d'intégrer
countries are trying to
dans leur
integrate
réponse
in their
économique à la
answers,
crise
their
de Covid,
economic answers to the COVID
leur
crisis,
action climatique
their
et leur
climate
feuille de route
actions,
climatique,
their roadmap
eh bien,
in
il me
terms of
semble que
climate,
ce
I
point-là
believe
de
that
comment intégrer l'économie informelle, comment intégrer les
how
personnes
can
qui
we
jouent un rôle
integrate this informal
fondamental dans cette
economy
économie
in these
informelle
questions,
et qui pourraient participer de
which
manière très
could
forte à l'action
participate
climatique
strongly
dans
to
tous
the
les pays.
climate actions in all countries.
Ce volet-là, je pense, n'est pas
This
couvert
aspect is
aujourd'hui.
not covered today, as
Je
of
voudrais
today.
aussi
So I would also
cependant
like
apporter des
to
éléments d'information sur
provide
ce qui se passe sur
information
le
elements
terrain,
on what is taking
indépendamment
place
de
on
ce
the
que
field,
des
independently
gouvernements
from
ou
the
d'autres structures
governments or
peuvent
other
apporter comme aide.
structures and their
Nous voyons,
subsidies they
nous, dans les
can
réseaux
bring. We
d'ONG avec
see
lesquels nous
in the
travaillons,
NGO
tous les
networks
réseaux
with
féministes,
which we work,
une
all
action
the
qui se
feminist
coordonne et
groups, their actions
qui
that
est
are
très
being
solidaire, extrêmement
coordinated.
solidaire et
There's
qui
a
se
high
structure,
solidarity.
notamment
Everything
au
is
sein même de
being
la société
structured
civile.
at the
Par
heart of
exemple,
civil
dès les
society.
débuts de la
And
crise de
from the
Covid,
beginning of the crisis,
des
the COVID
centaines
crisis,
d'organisations
hundreds of
féministes ont
organizations,
monté
feminist
une
organizations,
plateforme d'entraide
created a
solidaire
platform
afin de se
for
tenir
a
informés
solidary help to be
des
informed
difficultés
about the difficulties
que les
that
personnes
they are
rencontraient
encountering
dans leur pays,
in their
éventuellement
countries,
des
and
violations des
eventually
droits humains,
violations
mais
of human
également des
rights,
actions
and
d'entraide et de
also
solidarité qui avaient
solidarity
lieu.
and
Et
actions that
cette
took
plateforme
place.
s'appelle
And
la
this
réponse
platform is called
féministe au
Réponse féministe
Covid-19.
to,
Et pour moi,
so
c'est un
feminist
exemple
answer to
vraiment
COVID-19,
essentiel
and
de
it
ce
is
que
essential
justement la société civile
for
est
civil
capable de mettre en
society
place
and to be
en tant
able
qu'action de résilience et action de
carry out
solidarité
resilient actions and solidarity
à l'échelle
actions
globale, puisque
on
vraiment ce
the
sont des
global
acteurs de
scale,
terrain, mais en
because
même temps
these are actors
qui
on
se
the
connectent
field
d'un pays à l'autre
who
et sur
connect
sur toute l'échelle mondiale.
across different
Et
countries
puis
around the
enfin,
globe.
pour donner un
Finally,
dernier exemple,
to give a last
je dirais
example, I would
d'actions
say
concrètes
of concrete
climatiques
actions,
qui
climatic
a
actions,
pu être freinée par
which
la crise de
were
Covid.
slowed down by the COVID
Je ne sais pas si vous
crisis.
savez, mais
I don't know
WCF,
if
dans
you
le
know that
cadre de notre
WCR,
travail
in the
avec
framework of our
la
work
constituante femmes et
of
genre de
the
la CNUC,
constituent for genders of
met
the
en
CNUC,
place chaque année une
implementing every
valorisation
year
des
a
initiatives genre
valorization
et
of
climat
initiatives
à travers un
on
prix.
climate,
Et
and
au sein
with a
des
prize
lauréates de ce
that is
prix,
given, and
nous avons en
the
particulier
laureates
une
of the prize. The prize was attributed
initiative
to an
technologique
initiative, a
extrêmement
technologic
important dont
initiative,
l'impact est
very
très fort, qui se
important.
passe
Its
en
impact
Inde,
is very
une
strong. It was
technologie
in
de
India.
collecte
It's
de l'eau de
about
pluie
a
qui permet
technology to
d'éviter des
collect
inondations pendant la
rainwater,
période de mousson et qui permet en même
and during
temps
the monsoon it
d'assurer
is
une
very
irrigation pendant les
efficient
périodes sèches.
and
Eh
helps
bien,
having
notre
the right
partenaire
irrigation
et lauréate avec
when
laquelle nous
there's a
avons été
drought.
en
So
contact très régulièrement,
there's
puisque
another
WCF
organization we
a
were
vraiment
in contact with
organisé des
regularly because
appels
WCF
très réguliers avec
organized
tous les
regular
lauréats, toutes les
calls with all of the
lauréates.
laureates, all
Eh
of
bien, elle
the
a pu
prize
témoigner du
winners,
fait que son organisation,
and
pendant l'ensemble de la crise
during
Covid et encore
all of the
aujourd'hui,
COVID
n'a pas pu
crisis
mettre en
up to
place
today, they
toutes
weren't able to put in place
les installations de ces
all of
systèmes
the installations
en raison
to use this system
malheureusement
that was invented,
des
unfortunately,
contraintes,
because of
le
constraints,
confinement empêchant les
because
déplacements
of the lockdown,
et en
not
raison
being able
aussi
to
de la crise terrible
move around,
de famine
to
et la
travel.
crise économique
And of course, there is
qui
a strong
existe
economic
aujourd'hui en Inde.
crisis that
Donc
exists in
là, on
India
voit bien
today.
que
So
l'action
we
climatique
see
est freinée
well
puisque ces
that all
solutions
these actions
permettent
are
à des régions qui sont
impeded in
extrêmement
these
impactées par le
regions, which
changement
are
climatique,
very
de retrouver
strongly
une
impacted
résilience
by climate
climatique très
change. It is
forte
impossible for them to
et
be
l'action de
resilient,
notre
and
partenaire
the
sur le
actions
terrain
of our partners
a
on the
véritablement
field
été freinée.
have been slowed down also. All right, very well. There is a message, a very positive message, in fact, between the bad news, there is some good news. So with, in fact, there's a strong mobilization, a citizen mobilization, and a strong mobilization of the NGOs, good
Absolument, oui, je
solidarity.
dirais
Yes,
qu'effectivement,
absolutely.
le témoignage de cette
I would say
solidarité
that
nous a donné
these
beaucoup
testimonies of
d'espoir
solidarity
et je
gave us
pense que
great
ça
hope,
a aidé
and I
énormément
believe that
de personnes sur le
a
terrain
lot
qui
of
sont
people
confrontées quand
on
même
the
à des
field
conflits armés, à des violences
where
extrêmes,
there are
à
conflicts,
s'en
armed
sortir.
conflicts in
Donc ça,
certain parts of the
c'est
world.
vraiment un
So
message positif, on
this
peut le
is
dire.
a positive message,
Cependant,
we
il me
can
semble
say
qu'on
so.
doit rester conscient du fait et de
We
la
must
violence avec
remain
laquelle
conscious of
les
the
personnes sur le
violence
terrain et en
that
particulier
people
les femmes
on the
sont touchées
field
aujourd'hui.
are
Et je pense
touched.
que dans
And
l'action
I
climatique,
believe
il est
that in the
absolument
climate
essentiel de
action,
se
it is
rendre compte à
crucial
quel point
to
ces acteurs et ces
be
actrices de
aware
terrain
that these actors
sont
on the
essentiels, sont des
field
pivots
are
fondamentaux de la
essential. There are
résilience en
pillars
cas de
of the
crise,
resilience
que ce soit
in
une crise
a
climatique,
case of
une
crisis, whether
crise
climatic
sanitaire,
or
une crise
sanitary
économique.
crisis, economic crisis.
Et aujourd'hui, ça
And
doit être un
today,
enseignement vraiment
these must
important
be important
pour
teachings
réorienter
for us, lessons
nos politiques climatiques et
to
s'assurer
orient our
que justement cette
politics
action de la
in
société
terms of
civile à
climate.
l'échelle
And this is why
locale et cette
civil
action
society
notamment des
locally and these
organisations de
actions
femmes
from organizations,
soit
women
davantage
organizations,
soutenues, soit
need to be
davantage
supported
intégrées
more
dans les
and
politiques climatiques.
integrated in
Parce
the
qu'aujourd'hui,
climate
je pense qu'elle
policies,
ne l'est pas
because today
suffisamment.
I
On
believe
ne se
they're
rend pas
not
compte à quel
integrated
point
well enough,
cette
and we don't
inclusion
realize how
permettrait de
this
transformer l'impact
integration
de
would
nos
transform the
politiques
impact
climatiques,
of our climate
avec
policies,
notamment
with
beaucoup plus
namely a
d'investissements
lot of investment
dans justement une transition vers
a
une
transition
production plus
going
durable, par
towards
exemple,
more
qui
sustainable
intègre
production,
les productions
which would
réalisées par les femmes dans
integrate
l'économie informelle.
women in the economy
Voilà, ça
as
pourrait
well.
être un exemple.
So this could
Évidemment, je
be
pourrais
an
en donner des milliers
example.
d'autres,
Of
mais
course, I could
je
give
pense
you
que
1,000 more,
mon temps d'intervention ne
but I
ne
believe
suffirait pas à
I
cela.
wouldn't have enough time to do so.
Dommage parce que c'est extrêmement intéressant et que
This is very interesting. Indeed, it's a shame we don't have more time. Of course, the role of women is key. We have not talked about this. I imagine that
Oui,
access
alors
to education
absolument. Si
was
vous
probably
voulez,
also
si j'ai encore un
slowed
peu de temps
down.
pour
Yes,
poursuivre, dans
if
ce
I
cas
may
très volontiers.
just continue.
Voilà,
Just one
oui,
minute,
au Cameroun,
please.
par exemple,
Yes, in
une
Cameroon, for
des
example,
lauréates nous a parlé de ce problème terrible de l'accès à l'éducation, des enfants qui effectivement se sont retrouvés confinés, les parents devant essayer de survivre, n'ont pas du tout pu s'occuper de les aider à poursuivre leur éducation, évidemment sans aucune connexion Internet, il était impossible pour ces enfants d'accéder à un contenu éducatif ou pédagogique. Et là, effectivement, pour la jeunesse, c'est extrêmement inquiétant parce que ce sont des enfants déscolarisés et des familles qui sont dans l'incapacité de les aider. Et je pense que c'est le constat qu'on peut faire dans le sud, mais à mon avis dans le nord également, en fonction des différentes classes sociales et des populations, on retrouve ce problème très fortement.
And we've seen this over and over again. Thank you very much, Anne. And this really helps us understand what are the consequences, economic and social and economical consequences. Of course, the problem is not so much when we focus on sectors like building, transport, we could sometimes forget this other aspect, which is very important. So thank you, Anne, for sharing this. Now, Henri Waisman, I'm now turning over to you. During the discussions which we've had to prepare this roundtable, you insisted on the fact that you insisted on the short-term and long-term impact of the crisis, which we should not mistake, but we should not, be confused about the short-term and the long-term, impact of the crisis. Now, what could we say about the crisis now? What has been your experience and your analysis of the report, the annual report of climate change? Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate and thank the climate change team. I think what they are producing is extremely helpful, very practical, and really helps to highlight issues which are so key if we want to look at the crisis in the context of the more in-depth transformation. So there is a challenge there. 2020, of course, is an extraordinary year in all aspects for climate action. But what is at stake, what has been asked by this analysis is that in which way what has happened this year would help to speed up or slow down the radical transformation which we are talking about. So we need to step back, which is difficult, of course, to do so because of this situation. But if you want to try to assess what is going on and look at the perspective of the climate issues, we need to step back and look at the long-term, more long-term effects. We're trying to build a society which would be carbon neutral. So we need to, and we'll be reducing its emissions, its gas emissions. So we need to look at these impact, not so much in the short term. We know that the gas emission will decrease because of the drop in the request and the demand, and we know, but that is not the kind of transformation that we are looking at if we want to go and focus on a target of zero carbon. As I was thinking about this issue, and as I was looking at this report, I'm going to be very quick, don't worry, but there are four points which came to mind, which really illustrates this importance and the analysis that climate change is producing. First of all, is the way we ask the question, even in this report, and in which way what has happened during the crisis would slow down or speed up I think the word that is used is feeble signals. I think this is a key question, of course, to be asked. This crisis highlighted some transitions which have not been negatively affected by the crisis. And it also revealed some changes. We talked about soft mobility, cycling in Paris, for example. I do that every day. That's something that is very striking. We've seen other things like concerning renewable energy, we've also noticed that there are other components of the transition that are showing some frailty. And this crisis, during the crisis, and also some reaction to the crisis, for example, we feel like we're stepping back or moving backwards, like the exit of the coal industry, which in some countries, this is a real concern. Does it mean that every time we have a difficulty, we have a crisis, we are going back to coal? That really raises a question and challenges the fact that the transition that was started beforehand, and I'm going to put on my hat of the GIEC for a few seconds, but the GIEC is showing clearly that if we want to comply to the Paris Agreement, we have to come out of the coal completely by the mid of this century. So if every time we face a new difficulty in the economic situation, we move backward, we step back again, then we may have difficulties reaching our goal. So I think this crisis is actually very much revealing of what's happening, of the trends which are more fragile and those that are more that are stronger, and how to make the weaker trends more solid. Now, the second point that was revealed by this crisis, in my opinion, and I'm talking more about the climate transition, I think it has revealed the frailty of some economic models. We have noticed that some economic models, the most conventional models, actually are rather fragile in the face of disorder and some changes like we've seen in the last decades. So this really shows that there is a need for radical change and transition. There is a challenge there to know how to support and help towards this transition and support a future to better face these points of weaknesses. We mentioned it on several occasions. How do we, but the question is, how do we react to this crisis? If the reaction to the crisis is to go back to something that's somewhat artificial, but if we want to be serious in the energy transition, we need to reinvent a new model. And yet, if we continue to finance former models, then we will be in contradiction between the transition as it is today and as we want it to be in the future. Now, the third point, which is at the heart, of course, of all that climate change is doing, and the association, is a key role of non-state actors in this transition. We've seen it very clearly. Many examples were quoted, and I'm not going to mention them again, but the transformation and the transition that we talk about is not going to be decided by the states alone. It needs to be decided by all actors and requires a good collaboration, a good partnership, and therefore non-state actors, we're talking about local authorities, private sectors, etc., they all have a role to play. And the key challenge is to make sure that all actors would not take or not make their own decisions separate from each other. We've seen this in the crisis. We've seen how companies or various sectors have tried to come up with their own solutions, or states finding their own solutions. Maybe it's difficult in the face of an emergency, but what we're talking about here, when we talk about national contribution and long-term strategies that we need to build together, is to actually build relevant and consistent strategies. And I think some of our speakers mentioned this, is to look at the way that the commitments, look at the number of commitments that companies have made, but also local authorities. Many have made commitments towards zero carbon policy. Now the challenge for these people is to move from a commitment to an action. We need now to put down strategies, to look at strategies to really reach these goals, which are ambitious, but to make sure we can find the proper modality to make sure that the commitments can now be turned into some actions. And the last point, the fourth point, something which was also mentioned by Ronan, Dantec, and other speakers, the fundamental connection between climate and sustainable development at large and the reduction of poverty. We've said it over and over again. This crisis, and I think that struck all of us, this crisis, like many other crises, but in particular that crisis is revealing the deep inequalities. Of course, we could not compare this in terms of climate change, but this gives us an overview of that, of the fact that in a case of crisis, if you look at what the GIEC report says about global warming and giving clear indication of the millions of people that are in poverty with the global warming change, it's not an environmental topic. It's actually a topic for social and economic development. I think this crisis has revealed this very strongly and has shown in a much more impressive way the importance of building and developing strategies that would not be climate strategies, but that would be development strategies, low carbon strategies, a strategy that would include poverty at the heart of our reflection, because that's the condition for building transition that would be efficient. Okay, these were my 4 points. Just to conclude on your question whether or not we have speeded up or slowed down, I think the answer would be both. We have done both. Of course, there has been a number of things that have been put on hold. For example, the report mentions the COP26, which has been postponed by a year, and a number of processes that have been in difficulty. But another indirect effect has been a speeding up, an extraordinary, I don't know if it's a good or a bad, speeding up of our schedule. Because of all this, we are not talking about new money coming in. We're talking about a budget, money that will be spent in the coming months, and the decisions that will be made as part of the recovery plan will condition our capacity to reach our climate objectives and goals. We know that many decisions that are made today in sectors which are as intensive as the energy or transport and so on, these decisions will condition the way things will develop in the future. So of course, there is a lot at stake, and we need to make sure that the recovery plan comply better than they have today, so that this crisis will really lead to the transformation which we are hoping to see. Now we're going to conclude with one question which I'm going to ask to all of you, which has come out of the questions from our followers. Now, which actors have been doing the best? Could you answer this quickly? They have been more flexible. I don't know. Johan, over to you. You seem to be unsettled by this question. Not necessarily easy to answer this question. Part of the question, or the answer rather, is goes with what I said earlier. What this showed, there was some kind of resilience and capacity of adaptation, both from the local authorities as they try to implement new modalities for transport, mobility. This revealed a number of things which showed that we can also trust our society overall to try to adapt to a particular situations. You're talking about the civil society. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I have to make it very short. Just one phrase, one sentence each. Okay, over to you, Gilles. One sentence, really. The main topic for me at the moment, and I think the second lockdown could help it, is to remember that after the lockdown, the world will be different. Some say we should not go back to the abnormal of before, but also this other way of thinking that we will no longer work the way we used to work. We will work from home a lot more. this says a lot about the way we're going to build our cities, about the way the buildings are going to be built, the way we share the space we have in common. It says a lot about all these issues and the efforts which will be made for reducing the gas emissions and living in a different way and entering a more circular world. And we need to realize and accept that there will be things that we used to do yesterday which will need to be reformed. And it speaks also about a common effort which all of us need to make, and starting with companies and industries. You said as a conclusion earlier that the use was not, no, what I meant by, sorry, I agree about the use, yes. I wrote a book talking about the millennials. If we consider all, if we put all the under the age of 30 in difficulty, they would not have the peace of mind to develop, and we have a necessity to help and change the way we do things. Let me reassure you, yes. Now I'm talking in terms of training, and also to realize that we will be living and working differently in the future. Let me reassure you, I totally agree with you. Okay, now I give the floor to Anne. I would say that this crisis has really highlighted the fact that in order to have an efficient climate action, we need to integrate the SDGs fully in our climate action, and we need to recognize the inequality, the disparity that are there in order to implement more relevant climate actions and more efficient climate actions. So I want to thank all the team Climate Change for including this aspect in their report, because I think it's absolutely key, and we've seen this at a local level. We've seen it at the level of the organization that we've been working with. We've seen that the fact that we understand the SDGs and the fact that we implement them is totally in line with our climate action. Thank you, Stephen. Very quickly,
yeah,
as a conclusion.
For me, it's about lessons learned, and I think we've learned from the changed working practices so society can function without great amounts of unnecessary travel. But I think the greatest lesson that we can learn from this is the pandemic has shown the scale of action our national governments can take in the face of an emergency if they're suitably motivated, and we can only hope that they carry this degree of motivation across to tackling the climate emergency.
D'accord, donc, ok, donc c'est plus finalement de coopération entre
what you're talking about, more of a cooperation between non-state and state actors, is that right, what you're saying? Okay, thank you, Stephen. Okay, I'll hand over to Henri now, very quickly. I think what this crisis showed is that we can change. It is possible. For those who have the capacity to adapt, radical changes can be made. So the question is not so much to know whether or not things will change radically. Things will change, yes, but the question is, are we going to be passive? Are we going to be in control of the change? We're not going to ask, we should not ask whether or not there will be a change, but the question is whether or not we'll be able to control, to master the change and make something positive out of it, and to build something, and to build dynamics that would help us to comply to our objectives. So we could conclude, therefore, that maybe the COVID crisis could help raise a greater awareness about climate action. Now I'm closing this roundtable and handing over to you. Thank you for this roundtable. It's always very difficult, especially in a video conference, to reduce our time of speaking. It's always a challenge. Thank you, Juliette, for this, for facilitating. I found all of our discussions very rich, very interesting. And mainly to echo what Henri was saying, this crisis is really revealing, because it's been unsettling our various systems and has highlighted our points of weaknesses and strengths. It is showing now what is working, what is strong in our climate transition, and what has been weak, and what has been questioned and challenged by those who do not want to change. And I think our next report at Climate Change would have more challenges. The next two reports will show what has been speeded up, what has been slowed down, what has been fragilized. So I think it's very interesting that this report and the previous ones do not just simply give a general overview, but actually we've been trying, and this is what you can find in the 250 pages, which I invite you to read, but really at the end of the day, what has been strengthened, what has been comforted. We've talked about a few examples, but what stands out, what has been unsettled, and what Gilles was saying, I think Gilles already gave us part of the topics for our next year's report. I hear what he's saying about the youth and the concern about the youth, also the digital dimension. Climate change hates general phrases and always tries to come out of a ready-made mindset. So we have a whole lot of elements here that we will probably be tackled even as of early of next year, to discuss whether or not we will be going back to last year's or to the previous world, or whether we will move on to new behaviors. We are all convinced that the connection with development is key, that is absolutely essential. And I think with Stephen, the year will be very rich until the COP in Glasgow, especially regarding the role of the local authorities, which, and I would conclude, but on this, which had lost part of their political space within the COP. Now they are failure of this, which was to develop a better cooperation between state and non-state actors. I think the COP was suffering from this, and I hope that this crisis will help local authorities and non-state actors, NGOs, etc., to have a better intervention in the COP. And we know the support and the willingness of the Scottish actors to help us in this. So that's what I wanted to say. We now have to read the 250 pages of the report in the coming days. That's all. You can also take it chapter by chapter. And also, I just want to thank the team at Climate Change, the team at the Observatory, Teresa Ribera, whom we know very well. We worked with her when she was the director. She now is the minister, the Spanish minister for ecological transition. She is coming with a word of conclusion, so I hand over to her now. Teresa Ribera, she's the ecological transition minister of the Spanish government. Non-state actors have played a key role in climate action, and they need to continue to do so, and even more. Investors, cities, associations, public opinion, they all need to understand what needs to be done and how to do it and why it should be done. And the multiplication of roles in everyday life is very important. Cities must be on the cutting edge and can play an important role in order to decarbonate our energy consumption, our mobility, and facilitate climate action for low carbon energy comfort. The same goes for investors. They assess where the risks are and what are the decisions and the values they want to support. And they understand even more so how we need to be more aware of the climate risk. And now, what about the media? And what about the investors in connection to the media to explain what their role is and make the connection between what we have today and what we need to do to resist climate change effects and also to decarbonate all our economy. Then we have the researchers who help us understand why we need to do more and how quickly we need to do it and what are the most complicated aspects. It is important to gather all this knowledge to make the connection between all the key players in climate action, which is why I believe that this initiative is very important. It is good to, from time to time, get together to assess our actions, look at what is working, what is not working, and this is really key to improve our reactivity. The pandemic, which we are experiencing and which has been affecting us in such a painful way, has revealed that there are many risks that we are not prepared to face. We think that there are certain areas of vulnerability and possibilities of suffering which we must avoid at all costs. And this is a common point to climate change and climate disorder, which also highlight the frailty of human being and which reveals also how much we need to be prepared to develop resilience to face these changes. And what we are developing, what we are building around the defense of our society and the defense of our economy in the face of the COVID situation is revealing that we need to build a more resilient and transforming recuperation to mitigate the consequences of climate change, and for this to become a reality in order to prevent the most vulnerable communities from major suffering. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, Minister of the Ecological Transition and the Spanish government. As a conclusion, you will find all of this report and all of this assessment sector by sector on our climate change website, both in French and in English, or English next week, already available in French. You can look at the report and then look at the summary also for the decision makers or per sector. And also what is important about our assessment, our report, we also have assessment per sector, energy, textile, etc. So let's meet again tomorrow, and this will be every day. There will be one at 11 o'clock, another one at 3 o'clock. So we'll be talking about the various sectors and try to answer the issues regarding every sector that will be studied. To find again the details of all the roundtables, go to our website, climatechange.org. I know most of you know this already. Let me thank also our translators for our patience. We are a few minutes late. Let me thank also Antoine and Amaury, who are really the basis of our observatory and the ground of our observatory, and have produced this report. It's always been difficult in the last couple of days, so I want to thank them for also thank the rest of the team and all the climate change team, Romain Crouzet, all of the team. Any journalists, of course, can contact them to get additional information. And also Eva Radek, who has invested a lot in preparing this meeting. I wanted to thank all of them. It's a huge work. And this will continue all throughout this week. And already you've noticed the dates that we have fixed for next year. So this is an encouragement for next year. Thank you all. And let's meet again throughout the week for the roundtable. Thank you to all of our speakers for their presentations, And we want to greet especially our friend from Scotland. This COP in Scotland will be very important. Already we'll meet in Glasgow, and a few addresses of pubs that we can find when we get there. And let's meet again for this week's event and other events in the next year. And I will conclude now. I did not quite agree with my friend Gilles. I think, however, that the physical summits still have a future, and we could not just stop going to summits and just simply do video conferences. I think we will need to meet around a table and even talk in the corridors. So Climate Change is already working on these events for the coming year. But please take time just to look at this report. That will really help you understand some of the strategies. Thank you to all of our thank you all of you. Romain, have I forgotten something, or am I good? Perfect. Okay, let's thank you everyone. Thank you for all who followed us. I think you are about 150 of you. And let's meet for the other sessions throughout this week. Thank you. Bye-bye.